done in terms of OM research and science at the MRF. So this is just a little synopsis to date of what we have funded. I mentioned earlier that between 2011 and 2025, we have funded the spectrum of research in ocular melanoma at the foundation. And that is everything from medical students all the way up to team science awards. And it's really exciting because, again, as you know, in the rare disease space, there hasn't been a ton of investment, again, because it's a smaller patient population. So we've really been able to fund the spectrum of investigators. And what I love to see, and we did 3 this year, are funding those medical students, those bright young minds who are interested in this disease. I think that's personally really exciting to see. So I wanted to highlight a few of them. So this is Jonathan Wang. This is a medical student that we funded at Harvard this year. And it's really interesting because he's looking at socioeconomic factors in uveal melanoma treatment and survival in veterans. So I want you guys just to kind of think about the veteran thing for a second, because I'm going to get back to that. But melanoma at large impacts our servicemen and women far more than the general population, both in cutaneous or skin melanoma, as well as uveal melanoma. So I just want you to kind of like tuck that in the back of your head for a second, because we're going to come back to it. But it's really a very interesting thing. And that's why some of the funding things we're going to talk about later are really important. So we're really excited that Jonathan's looking into this. And hopefully, when we meet next year, we can give you an update on his research and some of the outputs from that. Here's another young medical student that we funded this year, another bright mind. She's at OHSU. She's looking at multimodal tumor measurements for advancing uveal melanoma diagnosis. So again, really exciting work. And you can see her mentors are listed there. But again, the fact that young people are interested in this, I think, is really exciting and hopeful. And I think, again, in a year, we're going to be able to come back and say, okay, well, what did this project result in? One medical student we funded was just published in Science, which is a huge publication, about the link between cutaneous melanoma and Parkinson's disease. That was a medical student that we funded. It was just published. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. So I think funding these young people is going to make a huge impact and really exciting for you guys to know about. Another medical student that we funded, environmental factors and social determinants of health in uveal melanoma. Environmental factors. We do not know what causes uveal melanoma, right? So again, this is exciting that we're looking into multiple ways that we could get at the root of what causes this disease. We know that cutaneous or skin melanoma is caused 90% of the time by UV sun exposure, not the case in uveal melanoma. So one of the things that is really exciting that we have done specifically in funding OM research was a Team Science Award. So this was funded last year, and it was in honor of Lindsay Zubak, a young woman who's a metastatic uveal melanoma patient in Denver. We honored her with a Courage Award at our Denver Gala many years ago, and she's been very involved. And unfortunately, she is one of those people that none of the treatments work on. She is that unicorn where every single thing fails for her. And she and her family said, we know that research creates hope and hope changes everything. So what can we do to fund research that may help me and may help a lot of other people? So she and her family fundraised, and they did a pickleball tournament, and they did all sorts of creative things to raise money, and they raised $250,000. And we said, okay, well, what we're going to do is we're going to write an RFP, a request for proposals, and we're going to put it out to the uveal melanoma research community. And we want them to figure out ways to treat metastatic uveal melanoma that do not have any current indications with the current FDA approved treatments. So we put out an RFP. It was very competitive, and we have a scientific advisory committee that scored these proposals, and we picked the most highest scoring competitive proposal. And this is who we funded at Dana-Farber. And It's really exciting because what we kind of forced to happen was for multiple centers to work together on a research project. So we just finished year one of this project, and I'm really excited again next year to share the final result. But again, fostering that collaboration in the field, forcing people to work together really does move the needle in really exciting ways. And this was all because of a patient. That this whole research project, this team science award, was because of a patient who basically said, there are not enough options. What can we do? So I just wanted to sort of show the plot of how we started, way back in 2011 when the program started and where our research funding is today. And given the current research climate and the federal funding, I can tell you that our investment next year is going to be far more because we need to help make up some gaps where our federal government has been pulling back. So that's our goal, is to really increase this research investment over the next year. So remember when I said to tuck that veteran piece in your mind? So back in 2019, melanoma got pulled out of a pool of many rare cancers under the Department of Defense. So the Department of Defense primarily funds cancers that impact its military. And melanoma was a line item within many other cancers. And every year we had to advocate for melanoma. We would go and we would be there with stomach cancers and rare pediatric cancers. And we would tell them, and our advocates, our patients would tell their lawmakers why melanoma was so important to fund. Well, in 2019, after years of advocating, they said, you know what, melanoma is so important. We're going to pull it out of this bucket and we're going to give you your own line item in the Department of Defense through the congressionally directed medical research program. And it's going to be the MRP, the melanoma research program. And they said, and we're going to give you $10 million to start. And this $10 million will go to melanoma research and institutions all over the country. But what should we fund in melanoma? So the MRF and other advocacy groups came together and said, these are the important topics you guys need to fund in melanoma research. And one of them was rare melanomas. So we started with $10 million and we said, we need to grow this. It needs to be more than $10 million. Breast gets over $100 million. Prostate gets over $100 million. We need more for melanoma. So from 2019 to 2025, we grew it from $10 to $40 million. Huge investment for the melanoma community, huge investment for these researchers, who before had to scrap for a little bit in a pool, now had their own $40 million research funding stream. And again, we have the data that melanoma, again, affects people who are in our armed forces, pilots with uveal melanoma, and a lot of the civilian the military who are on the ground with the heavy UV exposure. We have all that data. So again, we started advocating and we started really pushing the status quo and saying, we need more funding, we need more funding. So we got to 40 million, very exciting. We did a carve out for rare melanomas and we said, now we need to go one step further. We need to involve patients in the grant review process. And they said, that's a great idea. You should involve patients. We should involve patients in the grant review process. And we should also involve caregivers. But how do we find those people? We said, well, that's where advocacy groups come in. Let us help identify patients and caregivers who might want to review all these proposals and give their insights as patients. Because it's great to recommend something on paper, but in actuality, if you can't go get a blood draw every other day, if you can't have multiple scans, if the protocol doesn't align with what was realistic, the research is going to fail. So we started nominating patient advocates to participate in the process. And we write letters of recommendation to the government, to the Department of Defense, through the CDMRP, for patient advocates like you all to get involved in this process. So this is my first plug. If you would like to be a grant reviewer, we nominate folks every single year, and we are in that nomination process now. So you may think, oh my gosh, I know nothing. I can't possibly read these research papers. I have nothing to offer. Let me tell you, over the last 6 years, I have seen researchers change their scores after hearing from advocate reviewers and having them give their commentary. They've changed their scores. Like, it is that powerful. And that's how much influence you all have in this process. So my plug to you all would be, if you are interested in becoming a grant reviewer, please reach out to us and let us know. We will write a recommendation letter for you. There's a wonderful training. And again, it's a really empowering process to be involved in. So I wanted to highlight one of the rare melanoma grants that was funded through the DoD, specifically for uveal melanoma. And this is a grant that went to Andrew Applin at Jefferson University. And I think it's really exciting to see some of the research that's already been funded through the DoD. But these are huge awards. I mean, this is not little money. This is big money over multiple years. And a lot of really great research is being done because of this. And it's being done in uveal melanoma, which is so exciting and so energizing. And again, you can go onto their website and see all the projects that have been funded to date. But this is funding that the regular, we could never give out $40 million as a foundation. You know, this is huge money that's making a huge impact in the field. So this is, again, one of the grants that was funded that I just wanted to highlight to you all. So this is a very busy graphic, but again, you know, when the MRP decided to include rare melanomas, which was back in May of 22, you know, they recognize that there are distinct characteristics compared to skin melanoma that make it different. So for rare melanoma patients to get involved in the grant review process, it's so important. We do not want to have a bunch of advocate reviewers that are just cutaneous or skin melanoma patients. We want advocate reviewers who are living this every single day. So they've recognized that this is a huge important need. So I would just, again, encourage you all, if you have the time, if you have the interest, if you want to find a way to get more involved, this is an excellent way to do it. So just sort of wrapping up on the grant reviewer piece, you know, again, I would say you will be supported 100% by the MRF if you want to do this. It is a great way to get back involved. What's happening on the federal funding level, just so you all are aware. So we went to the Hill in March, and we were told that FY25 funding would remain flat or the same through the continuing resolution. So as we know, the budget got punted. And we were told that the 40 million would stay secure for FY25. And that when we went to the Hill with our advocates, what we really need to focus on was FY26. So we went to the Hill, we talked to lawmakers, and they were all the same, you know, yep, FY25 will be good. You know, FY26, we don't really know what's going to happen, but I think your 40 million will be fine for FY25. So we're like, great. Okay. You know, our advocates were pumped. We left the Hill. 4 days later, a memo was leaked that said the CDMRP program was getting cut by 57% for FY25. We were all like, what? We were just there. What do you mean it's being cut by 57%? So we started a huge call to action campaign. Our advocates mobilized. They called their lawmakers. We had a sign-on letter. We circulated that to all of our researchers in the community. They signed on. We sent it off, and we sort of waited. And then a memo was leaked. And the memo said that certain diseases had to stay preserved and certain diseases could be cut. And melanoma was one that was preserved at 40 million. Other diseases were cut completely. Kidney cancer, completely gone. Certain brain tumors, completely gone. So the program was significantly reduced. Again, it was reduced by 57%. Melanoma, thankfully, the 40 million was preserved. So right now, the website is open and clinicians are able to apply, you know, to submit their pre-applications, but we don't know is what's going to happen in FY26. So the 40 million we have today may not be the 40 million we have tomorrow. So what we're doing as a foundation is really connecting with you all and saying, we need your voices. We need you to connect with your lawmakers. We need you to tell them how important it is that we sustain this research funding, Because again, $40 million is huge, but the fact that there's a rare melanoma focus is also huge. I mean, the grant I showed you from Andrew Ablin, that was a $2 million award. I mean, it's really huge money, and it makes such a difference in, the clinician's ability to move the science forward. And I think that's the biggest thing. We know that there's cuts. We know that the NIH and the NCI and the CDC have already experienced cuts. And the fact that we've been able to preserve this 40 million is huge, but we don't know what next year holds. So again, your voice is the most powerful voice in the room when we meet with lawmakers, when we facilitate these meetings. They don't want to hear from the MRF. They want to hear from their constituent who pays the taxes in their state, who has a stake in it. They want to hear why you're there. They want to hear your story, and they want to know why it's so vitally important. Many of the people here are on clinical trials, right? So that's the future, and that's where we're going, and that's why we have to stay on top of it, and we really have to make sure that you all know this funding exists, number one. You know the impact it's having, number two, and you know why we need to keep it around and keep growing it. So, I worry about these other diseases. Pancreatic cancer was also one that got cut. So these are big diseases that impact a lot of people and have very dire outcomes, so we have to stay ahead of it, and we have to encourage everyone to get involved. When I first started working in the MRF 10 years ago, I was like, oh my God, I can't speak to a lawmaker. I'm like, that just made me queasy. I'm like, I don't know what to say. I'm going to say the wrong thing. We do a whole day training. We train you, and a lot of times you're meeting with their staffer who's 22 years old and knows nothing about the disease, right? They know nothing about the disease, and you're educating them. And when you leave those meetings, they're like, oh my gosh, like I had no idea you could get cancer in your eye. Like I had no idea I need to get my skin checked once a year. All these things that you're the educator, you're the expert in the room. And I think that's why it's so important that you all know what's going on, right? That you all know what's happening in Washington and what could happen, in the next year, and how we can, as a community, can stay on top of it and really continue to advocate for more research funding, sustained research funding, a focus in rare melanomas, and really impress upon lawmakers like how this can hurt the overall research community if that funding gets cut. So that is my plug to you all. I know you are all passionate. I know you all care about the research that's happening, and that's why you're here. You want to educate yourselves, and you want to know, what's down the line, and who are the best people to talk to, and how do you access them. And it's equally important to know what's happening on a federal level in terms of funding, how that could impact hospitals and institutions on the local level, and how that would trickle down to you in terms of an access treatment level. So I just encourage all of you guys to get involved, talk to us about how we can set up meetings with your state representatives. We can get you, on our advocate newsletter so you understand the policies and the calls to action that you can sign on to. But it's critically important, and that's why we need your help. And we're just at a place where we're very grateful we have the 40 million, but again, we don't know what next year is going to hold. So we have to keep making sure our voice is loud and powerful, and that we're in front of those lawmakers year round, not just once a year when we know that they're going to be voting on appropriations and trying to figure out, how much they're going to give melanoma. So thank you all so much. I'm happy to take any questions about what we're doing, what's happening, policy stuff, anything like that.
Test.
I'll just note, not so much a question, but having done the CDMRP consumer reviewer thing for like 5 years, it's if anybody's wondering whether they should do it or not, let me tell you the level of encouragement you get in participating, because you see what you see here and hear from these doctors, you hear across the board from many different centers who are putting in proposals for funding, and it gives you a lot of hope and encouragement when you get to see what's coming around the corner. And the other thing I'll say is that the number of people looking into ocular melanoma has just skyrocketed over the last 5 years. When I first started doing it, there was a couple of proposals maybe for ocular melanoma. Now there was a bunch for all the rare melanomas in particular, but ocular melanoma has just seen and it kind of what I'll describe as, compared to where we were 5 years ago or 10 years ago, an explosion of research that's happening. So it's really important, the work that they're doing, but B, as a participant, there's a lot of value that's added to yourself. And if you think of our existence at this point in time as nothing more than trying to make it better for whoever gets this disease 5 or 10 years from now, it gives you the opportunity to impact or to influence what's happening next and giving hope for the people in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I do. Oh, you do. Hi, I'm just curious because I am this is my second cancer actually, and my first cancer was breast cancer 16 years ago. I am very aware that breast cancer gets almost too much funding. And I hate to say that because, having accessed that assistance 16 years ago, but I'm curious what has happened traditionally and may happen or not happen anymore as to accountability. Like, how does each advocacy group that gets hundreds of millions of dollars, how do they prove their worth? Is it driven by statistics? Is it driven by hospital stays? Or does somebody just, do a paper to tell somebody possibly the wrong information? Like, how is the accountability held? Because since we are such a small population, it would be rather easy to kind of prove ourselves at this point that we need a little more help to at least join the level playing field.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure even what my question was. I
think
went all over the place.
Yeah, no, I think I understand. So just to be clear, the advocacy groups do not get the funding. The advocacy groups nominate advocates, you all, to help review proposals. The grants go to the physicians and the institutions. So the funding goes to Thomas Jefferson, Dr. Andrew Applin, and and those proposals are the ones that are vetted and scored by clinician researchers and patient advocates. So we as an organization do not get any of the funding. We just nominate advocates to participate. Breast cancer, I will say, the whole reason the CDMRP started was actually from the breast cancer advocacy community. So, don't ever underestimate the power of advocates, because that's how it all started. It was the breast community who were fed up with their lack of options and basically charged Washington. They were like, hey, we need support. We need funding to find a cure for this disease. So, breast does get a great proportion of funding, but they work darn hard to get that funding. And they've developed leaps and bounds in terms of the treatment options that are available. And advocates were a large part of why that happened. So, I think your second question in terms of the accountability. So anything with the government, there's a lot of checks and balances. So these guys have to produce not only budget to actual reports, but quarterly and annual reports that they're giving back to the government on how they've used the funds, what their updates are in terms of the research. So there's a lot of checks and balances that any grant recipient receives has to do. So it's a very heavily regulated process, as John can probably attest to. They are really examining, it's taxpayer dollars, where this money is going and what it's funding. So it is held to a very high standard, and it's very competitive, to John's point as well. And the amount of uveal proposals that have come out over the last 5 years, again, when we started in 2011, there were 0 pharmaceutical companies involved, 0. There were no sponsors in the room because nobody was interested in it. Nobody was developing anything. And it was patients and researchers that came together. So I think it speaks volumes when you look at all the sponsors and you look at all the industry partners that are here today and all the patient advocates, that there has been a ton of progress that has been made, and it's really exciting. And I think as an advocacy group, we just don't want to see that stall. We don't want to take any steps backward. We don't want to lose any ground. We don't want to lose any funding for the research community. Just as an aside, I mean, as I shared earlier, we're a research funder ourselves. So we've funded 26 million in research to date. We sent out our RFP in December. It closed in March. We typically get 60 to 70 proposals. This year we got 109. So the demand and the fact that the research community is also very panicked, because they're losing federal funding from other streams, puts a lot of pressure, again, on advocacy groups to help fill that gap. And that's what we're going to try and do, is help supplement and make sure that we don't take any steps backwards for our patients, that we want to make sure that we're funding the best research and we're really providing more avenues for development and really helping support patients during this kind of turbulent federal funding time.
Can I just add, Kyleigh, that it may be unclear where we get our money to fund the grants that we do, and we're not able to fund all of those 109 grants that we did receive. But maybe you could share a little bit how because we're not federally funded, how we fund our grants.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. So we are not federally funded. We're not a family foundation. We do not have a benefactor. We are completely funded by the community we serve. So we are funded by our industry partners through sponsorship. We're funded through individuals making donations, our Miles for Melanoma program, other foundations, but we're completely funded by the community we serve. So, when we're looking at something like this, you go into the year and you're planning your budget, you're not anticipating, a huge uptick in the demand. And so now as a foundation, we're figuring out, how do we meet the demand, right? How do we continue and increase our investment back into research, which is a huge need right now.
Thank you. And how cool is it that 3 of our medical school grants went to uveal melanoma research this year?
Yeah.
Really cool. All right, Rich.
Regarding federal funding, is there a different strategic approach towards advocating with your senators and congressmen if you're in a blue state versus a red state? So we're from Massachusetts.
Yeah.
Our guys are going to advocate, generally
Yeah.
speaking, for all cancer research, especially with everything that's going on with Harvard as an example. It's almost like, the effort that we might put forth is not going to return any additional results. Should we be doing something different than somebody who lives in a red state where, maybe they can make a difference by really, advocating and pursuing?
That's such a good question. And that was a big question for advocacy days too, from our advocates. I will say, when we went to the Hill in March, we heard the same response from both sides of the aisle. Research funding is so important. We want to preserve it. That's what we want. I think the difference between what everybody wants and reality is very different right now. Because everybody agrees that cancer research funding is vital, but whether it gets pushed through or not is a different story. So I think continuing to make your voice heard, whether you feel like you're preaching to the choir or not, is where we want to hit, right? Like, we don't want to just remain silent because we think, oh, you agree with us, so we're just not going to have the conversation. We want them to know why they need to make sure that they're pushing it, instead of saying, oh, well, I'll support another bill instead, because that may be more important. So I think it's equally important, because we did hear that from both sides when we were on the Hill. So we just don't want to go quiet, right? We want to say, we got our 40 million for FY25, everything's fine, or, oh, you agree with these policies, so we don't need to go meet with you. It's like, no, we have to be in front of these people constantly. So, and we will help you guys do that. So, but thank you so much. And again, if you have other questions, I'm happy to answer them, during break or at dinner. there's a lot going on in the DC policy world. So I'm happy to fill you guys in on some of the other things that we're hearing that could be coming down the pike at a later time. So